We've always been trying to understand ourselves throughout time. That's what we do as humans. This is just an accelerant for what we've been doing since we invented fire.
Hey, Karl, how's it going?
Pretty good. Are you checking out the Paris Olympics?
Yes, I saw that opening ceremony and wow, very French, very avant-garde fashion. There was flamethrowers and it was pretty spectacular. What about you? Have you been keeping up with it?
Yeah, so I also super enjoyed the opening ceremony. I just love Lady Gaga singing in French. She sounded super French. I don't know if I actually watched the full thing, but it kind of cut to the Marie Antoinette thing and then the heavy metal band Gojira playing where Marie Antoinette had been held. And I thought that was just like so fascinating. And then, of course, the controversy. But regardless, I've been enjoying watching the skateboarding, the surfing. I can't wait to see the breakdancing or the breaking. And then, of course, Simone Biles. I mean, she's the big news item. I don't know. Have you watched any of that? Did you see how all the celebrities were there to see her?
Yeah, of course. Simone Biles, the darling of America. She represents our country in so many ways. And she represents one of our favorite brands, K18 Hair.
Yeah, she's one of K18's ambassadors. It is true. And what I've seen of her performances so far have just been super amazing. And she's a legend for a reason because she's really good at what she does.
Yeah, it's incredible. Just in terms of her strength, the focus and energy she has brought to the game. She has kicked up gymnastics several notches. I can't help but think of another Olympics that has come across our desk that is a bit controversial. There are two founders that are trying to revolutionize the Olympics, and they're calling it the Enhanced Olympics. In this version of the Olympics, participants or contestants or athletes are able to take performance enhancing drugs, are able to do whatever they need to do to strengthen them, to make them faster, breathe underwater. And it's clearly controversial. Karl, what do you think about this? You're the first person that saw this and shared it with me.
Yeah, the guys who are the founders reached out to us maybe 2 or 3 years ago. It was a while ago. And then we had lunch with someone who was peripherally involved in them. And we've stayed in on-off communication with them, if I can say it that way. And whatever floats your boat. I'm not opposed to the Enhanced Olympic Games. I think it's an interesting idea. And why not? We've evolved into a place where we've got mixed martial arts as a sport. People love mixed martial arts. I'm not particularly a huge fan, mostly because I just don't know that much about it, but I'm fascinated by it. And so why not just take it to the next level and let people enhance themselves? This is a podcast about biotechnology and biology being used and leveraged as a technology. So why not leverage enhanced drugs to enhance competitiveness in a sport? It makes for something fascinating. I also know that the rules are that you have to be monitored by a physician the whole time that you're participating. And you probably have to wear some kind of wearable that's also tracking you. That increases the amount of transparency that is associated with participating. So yeah, I'm all into it.
Yeah, I hope that they actually have the Olympics. I know that they're still looking for athletes to sponsor, to be the face of the Enhanced Olympics, which I think might be challenging. I think they have a couple people on board that they announced, but they're still out there looking for those participants. And really, it would be like a poster child for biotechnology. How can we push ourselves using new types of drugs or prosthetics or whatever it may be, or even genetics? Could you imagine someone being genetically engineered to breathe underwater longer? I mean, whoa, that would be crazy, but interesting. I would tune in for sure.
There have been predictions that the first uses of CRISPR that are not therapeutic would be for enhancement purposes. Clearly, genetic diseases are really what it's being used for initially, but over time, it will be used to enhance people. You're in the middle of reading Chris Mason's book, The Next 500 Years, and I'm sure that talks about enhancing humans to be able to go off planet, where the environment is very different. You're exposed to different kinds of radiation. Oxygen levels are different. So you're not going to leave the planet without some kind of enhancement. Spacesuits only do so much.
Yeah, absolutely. This book is incredible. We'll put it in the show notes. Chris Mason is one of our Brooklyn friends. So shout out to him and shout out to his book. I'm only up to chapter 4, but a lot of it does talk about engineering life or space travel. But Another thing that is really interesting about space travel is, right, you can enhance yourself, but how can you enhance the environment in a spaceship? How do you create spaceship Earth so that you can sustain and regenerate and go to these other worlds? And a part of that has to do with the study of microbes. You shared an interesting piece with me about the microbes of trees. Can you share some things about that?
Yes, I read this article. We've been talking a lot about microbiomes and biomes in general. And so when I saw this article, I thought it made sense to just flag it because the article basically says that trees have on average 1 trillion microbes inside their trunks. The idea is that by understanding those microbes, you could end up developing probiotics to kill pathogens that could save forests. We know climate change is wreaking havoc on different forests. When I'm in the Adirondacks, the big worry up here is different kinds of fungi. The American chestnut was ravaged by fungi, and that was a tree that was all over the eastern seaboard. They're called the redwoods of the Atlantic, but they're gone, basically. There is a genetically modified version that is able to fight that blight or the fungus, but it hasn't been widely planted yet, and we're hoping to see that soon. But I think the more we know about microbiomes of forests, we can protect vulnerable trees, and there's a lot of other things we could do with that knowledge.
Yeah. You shared the link with me, and the title was 1 trillion microbes found in tree trunks. And I was like, that seems normal. And I'm like, is this science nerd clickbait? Because the human gut microbiome has 38 times more microbes than a tree's trunk. But it was just like, okay, I think for people that are studying the microbiome or reading into it like we are, I was like, oh, that article, who's it for? But hey, look, scientists, we need to play the game of breaking through the noise. If we need to do clickbait titles, let's do it. Thanks for sharing that. There's a lot to be said there as well.
Yeah, and then the other piece of news, you mentioned K18 at the top of the intro. As longtime listeners to Grow Everything know, we've worked closely with K18. K18 is a biotech company disguised as a very successful hair care company. Another company that's in the biotech beauty space is called Debut. And Debut has received a significant amount of funding from L'Oreal. And they just announced that they launched a BioX Beauty Labs contract manufacturing business. And the idea is that they're going to make more biotech ingredients available to brands. I thought this was a smart move because it does take a lot of time to develop biotech ingredients. There's a lot of startups working on those biotech ingredients. So perhaps by partnering with Debut and BeautyX Labs, it'll make those ingredients a lot more accessible to those bigger brands, and also to the middle brands that maybe don't have the money or the research and development efforts that maybe a really big powerhouse like an Estee Lauder or a L'Oreal already have in-house.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Karl. We know a lot of biotech beauty startups that are looking to leverage biotechnology. Debut received investment from L'Oreal, as you mentioned, and it's interesting that they're going in this direction. One of the things when it comes to new innovation and startups creating these companies, you always think, oh, they're going to take a bit of the market share from some of these large companies. Yet the world is controlled by 10 large CPG companies, and L'Oreal is one of them. All these new companies spinning up. So Debut is going to be a contract manufacturer. I'm really just interested to learn how that partnership goes. But yeah, it's going to be exciting to see who works with them, which startups will leverage the contract manufacturing capabilities that Debut is offering.
Yeah, you mentioned investors and investments, and I think that's a perfect segue into our podcast today. Today, we're interviewing Ari Wright of Bison VC. She invests in deep tech and has invested in companies like Alonia, who we featured on the podcast and mentioned many times. But it turned out that Ari knows a lot of people that we're friendly with, people who've been on the podcast and friends of us and Messaging Lab. So when we started chatting with Ari, turns out that she was friends with Shara Tiku of C16 Biosciences. They'd gone to business school together. And then given that she's in Los Angeles, I asked if she happened to know Jason Kaklianis or Ari Lipman, who are two friends of ours, and she knew both of them. So Ari is definitely someone who's already in our family, even though it was the first time we had met her. And Ari's going to talk a lot about investing in deep tech. I think we spent some time talking about Femtech. So let's let Ari take it away.
Ari Wright, thank you so much for coming on the Grow Everything podcast. We're excited to have you on and talk to you.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Awesome. So yeah, we're really excited because you have a very interesting background and now you work in a very interesting space. So you have a background in biomedical engineering and then you went towards the venture capital world. So first I would like to ask, what inspired you to pursue the path of biotech or biomedical engineering? And then how did you get into the world of venture capital?
Yeah, sure. So first phase of my career, I changed directions actually a number of times, always following my inspiration, and got really lucky to be able to do that and then find an interesting set of opportunities that allowed me to pursue these curiosities. I originally started out as a biomedical engineer, thinking that I wanted to work on cancer research and get my PhD. But while I was at college, I realized pretty quickly that that just wasn't going to be a fulfilling job for me. So it became a little bit disillusioned actually just working in the lab and understanding that that actually wasn't going to be my life's purpose. I ended up reading a book about climate change when I was in college. That was Hot, Flat, and Crowded by Thomas Friedman. Mm-hmm. And it pulled me into a completely different direction. And I realized that climate change is actually the most existential challenge of our time. And that book really put climate into a human perspective for me. I think leading up until that point, and this was 2009, I always thought of the environmental and the green movement as something very other to human beings and about saving the planet, saving the trees. And this book really put it into a different perspective for me. So I ended up getting a master's degree at USC. It was an interdisciplinary program within climate and green energy, and didn't know anything about the venture capital industry, but I ended up finding this opportunity and joining a firm as an intern originally called Braemar Energy Ventures based in New York, where I got to look at all kinds of different technologies in the what was called the clean tech space back then. After that, I ended up going to business school and changing directions yet again. I decided I wanted to build something in the wellness space, again, spurred by inspiration, and ended up joining a family office for a few years, actually acquiring and repositioning hospitality assets in the US and Europe. And that was a totally different experience and really interesting. Somehow it's all come together here at Bison in a way that I absolutely never, ever could have predicted or hoped for. So Ben and Tom, founders of Bison, I'd worked with Ben at my original venture firm. And Bison focuses on frontier tech really broadly. So anything with novel science or deep tech at its core, that's biotech, it's climate, it's AI, it's robotics. And somehow I was uniquely suited to join them, given the diversity of my background and the wandering of my path.
Give us a sense of like what the portfolio looks like. What stage are you guys investing in? And what are examples of the companies that you guys have in the portfolio?
Yeah, we're seed to Series A focused. This is our first fund. It's a $135 million fund, but we're investing pre-seed up to Series B. We have 10 portfolio companies so far, and they really span the gamut of what I just described. So we have a few therapeutics companies, we have a synbio company, we have an ag tech company, we have a company working in AI models and hardware, we have a robotics deal. So we're really focused on, again, anything that's using novel science, has technology differentiation at its core, going after very large markets. Tom and Ben, the founders, previously were at Cascade, the investment office for the Gates family. And this fund is an extension of the work that they were doing there. They decided to go out on their own a few years ago and launch Bison. So that's us.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, but I was taking a look at your portfolio, and one of your portfolio companies we had the pleasure of interviewing, because we also have the pleasure of knowing the CEO, Nicole from Alonia. That, first of all, amazing company. I know that, but I would love to learn a little bit more about what was the thinking behind investing in Alonia in particular.
Yeah, Alonia is great. Nicole's amazing. Tom actually knew her from when he was over at Cascade. They had invested in Ginkgo and had an existing relationship with Nicole. The thing that got us excited about Alonia is for a Series A stage company, they had already generated so much commercial traction, which is really rare in deep tech or climate tech or however you might want to categorize what they're doing. She had already lined up a range of partnerships with the most important strategics in the world on the mining side, on the CO2 mineralization side, and had a range of these really interesting projects going after solving these intractable waste problems. And then also this PFAS business where there were just enormous tailwinds. And when we had initially started digging into the company, none of us had ever heard about PFAS or forever chemicals. We did that deal, I guess it was December 2022. So it was the first time we were hearing about PFAS. And then as soon as we started diligencing the company, it seemed like every other day there was some article about these forever chemicals and how they were everywhere in all of our drinking water and how the regs were coming. And we felt that the strategy they were taking in PFAS by deploying technology that would not only separate it, but then also building biology to degrade it was just really compelling.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it was, I think, the same thing for me. I kind of had heard about forever chemicals, and now it feels like it's everywhere. I mean, there's even products that say PFAS free showing up. So I think we're at the very beginning on the product side where people are going to start to market things that way. But it definitely has hit the news in a really big way.
Totally. It's a whole category now, and there are tons of companies trying to go after this. But we're excited about the relationships that they have and the technology that they're deploying. And then they have a lot of other interesting projects, and they're getting most traction in the mining space. As we look at climate tech in general, we're always looking for companies that can solve an urgent commercial problem for a customer and lead with that. Never lead with the climate and sustainability. That should be not an afterthought, but that should be table stakes in everything that we're designing and deploying today. There are just so many interesting opportunities within mining to derive more value from low value ore and to use enzymes and microbes to be able to extract that value. Just a lot of really exciting projects in that space.
That's also super interesting. I think I probably said this when we interviewed Nicole. It's like I had read a while ago a report on innovation in the mining space, and none of this was in there. Yeah. It was more about recruiting people and maybe a mention of robotics, no mention of enzymes, no mention of biology, no mention of concentrating things at a higher level and being, I'll say extractive, even though we don't really like using that word, but being better about extracting things and then being able to regenerate the land that you were working with. None of it was anything that struck me as particularly innovative. So I've always been excited about what Alonia is doing and have always been excited by just using biology as being a way of improving the mining space. And Erum, you've got a good friend who's in the mining space at Rio Tinto.
Yes, yeah. My friend works more on the civil society outreach side, so is looking for solutions that are trying to address what mining has done. You know, Rio Tinto is a large company, and they have their mining sites. There are some issues around them, whether they are environmental or societal. But it sounds like the company is really trying to make a strong effort in ensuring that their impact is reduced. Mining's extractive. It's very harsh on the planet. But if you can do it in a way where there's offsets or you're reducing your impact on the environment and society, then it's great. It's great that they're making these efforts. It's great that my friend has that job. There is a role to engage society.
Absolutely. Yeah, the mining industry is at an interesting point. They're so critical to the future of the energy transition. We need these critical minerals. We need more materials to build electric vehicles and wind turbines and consumer electronics and everything. Historically, these have not been sustainable companies and they've not developed in the most sustainable way. And so they're at this crossroads where we need them to become more sustainable. And then along the way, I think we're going to have to just really drive more sustainability into their operations so that we're not doing more harm than good. And there are a bunch of interesting companies trying to help in that regard. And totally agree. I think these companies are doing their best to innovate. All of them have corporate venture capital arms. Several of them are investors in Alonia, and they're really looking for ways to just do better. And hopefully, like I said, do better and do things more efficiently because there's so much waste within the mining industry right now. It's not only bad for the planet, but it's not good for their financials. So that's a really interesting area for venture backable technology to play a role where these customers are getting really excited about deploying these new technologies.
Hi, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Messaging Lab, the force multiplier for biotech. Your biotech company is making the world a better place. You know that, we know that. But does the world? There's a big reason why some biotech companies attract investors, sign up customers, and get attention. That reason is strategic communications. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling narratives. And we have done that for the most successful biotech companies across healthcare, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice, visit messaginglab.com to explore how we can elevate your story and grow your business.
We need more of those stories to be told because it's just too easy for people to be like, oh, you want to go to EVs, but do you realize what the mining infrastructure looks like for that? It's really easy to poo-poo the transition because people are looking at one piece of it without really understanding the entire ecosystem, as it were. Right. And we just did an interview with someone in Queensland, Australia, where their main product is coal. The coal industry knows that that eventually is going to go away, and they're really working on transitioning the workforce away from that into something that is much more eco-friendly, but really with a focus on biotechnology.
I will also add that you're mentioning the cost of the mining efforts, right? There, like how much it's costing them to even maintain or even close down a mine. So my friend told me they spend $30 billion a year on mining closures.
Yeah,
and Rio Tinto is doing that responsibly, where there's a lot of other mining companies that sell off to a ghost shell company the rest of the mine, and then they just leave it. Like, it's not my responsibility anymore. So anyway, I mean, we're definitely going to have Nicole back on. And I mean, we could talk about it the whole episode. I mean, I'd be happy to do that. You have other companies.
Maybe I'll share another one in a different category, but similarly using biology, similarly going after climate. That is a company by the name of Interplant. Have you guys heard of Interplant?
No, but tell our audience.
Yeah, so Interplant is in the ag space, and they are genetically engineering row crops, so corn, cotton, soybean, to fluoresce a signal that can be detected by a satellite or a camera on the back of a tractor when that specific plant is under a given stress. So it could be fungal pressure, insect pressure, if they need fertilizer. So their platform is really enabling crop by crop precision farming at the earliest stages. So right now, crop losses are a huge problem. Farmers either apply pesticides in a broad spectrum way, just prophylactically, which is wasteful and creates runoff and is not great for the environment or our health. Or they wait until they see an outbreak of insect or fungal pressure and then apply, and it's usually too late. So you can harness the plant's natural immune system to detect those really, really early signals. It's almost the same as like your Apple Watch telling you that your heart rate variability is off before you're actually feeling sick. And farms are just getting so much bigger that to give these farmers that visibility into what's happening on the farm so they can plan, so they can act is really powerful. And John Deere actually led the Series A of that company. We came in behind them. They're developing, so their technology will be licensed to seed companies. They have a partnership with Syngenta, actually, who's looking to design really precise, specific crop inputs that would go with Interplant's seed technology. And then you have detection tech. So that might be with a John Deere tractor or satellite company. So we really get excited about this company in the ag space because we've found that getting that entire ecosystem on board to support this paradigm shift is really necessary. And there are a lot of companies that are selling point solutions within ag, and it's just very hard to get that adoption. And we've found there are just these big ag is big to get everyone on board and to have this win-win solution that's good for John Deere, it's good for the crop input companies, it's good for the farmers is really unique and interesting to us.
Yeah, that tech sounds so science fiction. There's a Japanese science fiction novel from, I think, the early 2010s called Gene Mapper, which is about eco-terrorists genetically modifying plants that you can detect from satellites. So as soon as you were saying that, it reminded me of that particular story. And that supposedly takes place in the 2040s. And there's a lot of controversy about the way they are genetically modifying plants. But this sounds just like that to me.
Yeah. Fascinating. I'll have to check that out for sure. It's interesting. So we find a lot of deep tech companies and deep tech VCs have these sort of like science project technologies, and we really steer away from that. We're very much about commercial traction now. What are the solutions that can get into market and really scale massive revenue? And if you look at Interplant on the surface, you're like, wow, this is so science fiction-y. This is wild. And it is wild. It's a radical new paradigm for farming. But because of what I said, you can see this transition taking place. And there have a lot of farmers on board. They have an investor, a big farming conglomerate group up in Canada backing them. And like I said, just the largest strategics that are all interested in making this happen. So we think even though it's science fiction-y, it's not so far out to imagine this transition taking place in the not too far off, hopefully before 2040.
Right. No, not at all. I mean, you'd probably read Gene Mapper and you would say, it sounds very familiar. I think they also use crickets as one of the ways to modify the plants, which that whole organism engineering hasn't happened yet. But we had worked with a company called Microbiomes, where the whole thing was really being about being able to orchestrate the way mRNAs or microRNAs worked in a plant. So you could really like control traits at a much more granular level than you would normally be able to do, which also sounded like science fiction. But they've also had huge success. And I just love that Bison's thesis is really like, how can you solve an urgent problem? And what kind of commercial traction do you guys have? Because I think, like you say, we see a lot of deep tech and even biotech VCs where it's really just focused on the science problem, not necessarily being focused on the commercial side. And I hate to say that. Erum, is that okay for me to say?
You can say whatever you want with free speech. So
I'm definitely guilty of falling in love with the science sometimes. And
oh,
they
yeah.
have to pull me back, or they're like, Ari, no. This is too far out there.
That's a scientist in you. You're going to get there, especially when you see some founders, which I would love to talk to you about founders and what you look for in founders, but just the science parts, because your gears are turning. You're like, I can see how this is helpful, but the science can only take you so far. You need the people that can actually make the partnerships. You need the Nicoles of the world that can go out there and hustle and get those clients and get those partnerships.
Yeah, exactly. And we even say a lot of times the best technology doesn't always win, right?
Yeah.
It's
Right.
the most scalable technology. And that's unfortunate because you might find someone that's invented something and you're like, wow, yeah, this is a better way of doing this. And it's more compelling on certain dimensions. But the realities of the systems in which we're playing just might not enable that technology to ever reach market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I do have one question about interplants. So it's the genetic detection. How is it being detected?
Essentially, the plant is expressing a fluorescent protein. It's not detectable by the human eye. It's not actually glowing. I mean, it's fun to talk about glow in the dark plants. It's not actually glowing, but you can detect it through computer vision or through satellite. And they actually it was a few months ago, maybe 6 months ago, they proved that they could detect the signal through satellite.
Amazing.
Yeah.
We were just talking about companies that don't succeed, even though they might have the best technology. They might not have the right commercial traction. We talk a lot about marketing since we run a marketing firm. But do you have any examples of companies that you guys have worked with that had a lot of promise, but maybe didn't quite make it? I mean, you don't have to share the company, but what went wrong? And we've got a bunch of those.
I mean, yeah, we have a bunch of those too. So myself, Ben, and Tom, we like to say we're Clean Tech 1.0 survivors. So we were all in that first wave of clean tech investing, late 2000s and early aughts. And there were a lot of failures. Some of it was Silicon Valley investors that had come in and then pulled out. But that exuberance, which we're nervous about today, by the way, what we've seen over the last 5 years in the climate space, people piling in and a lot of really amazing visions and ideas and technologies, but super capital intensive, a lot of them producing commodities. And not able to derive enough value in a sufficient amount of time. So we talk a lot about biofuels 1.0. There were these large centralized plants. They needed to access decentralized feedstock sources that were expensive. And then they were trying to make commodity fuels and chemicals. And so many of those companies just went up in flames over time. And I think the companies of today are so much smarter, and had so many of them on your podcast, where they're accessing cheaper feedstocks, some of them now even CO2. They're going after higher value chemicals to start. Maybe they're doing modular plants. They're co-locating near feedstock, and they're just being a lot more thoughtful about how you build a company in the space. Some of these companies are just not going to be venture backable, unfortunately. And we need government dollars to help assist in the energy transition and to fully get off petrochemicals. And I think we're still figuring out how to do that and how that's going to look over time. But it's just extremely difficult to manufacture things and to manufacture commodities, especially when you're competing against a heavily subsidized other industry that's existed for a very long time. So yeah, just a lot of companies in that vein that failed, I think, to appreciate the brutal realities of what they were up against, raising, and I blame investors too, right? Investors pour money, companies take on too much money, grow, and they don't grow intelligently in certain times where there's just more capital than can be really taken up. So a lot of failures and challenges. I won't speak to any specifics, but in general, deep tech and climate tech, we're just, like I mentioned, always looking for companies that can solve that urgent commercial problem, not make anyone pay a premium for what you're doing, and do so in a capital efficient manner, leverage partnership capital, leverage non-dilutive capital, do every leverage equipment financing, everything you can to bring down your CapEx. And there are a lot of investors that will just completely ignore these kinds of companies. Bison's reason for existing is we see an opportunity because there are companies where we think you can build intelligent companies that are venture backable, that are deep tech, that do require raising a lot of capital, but you just have to do that in a certain way because it is harder than building a software company and an app.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And you mentioned that Bison invests from pre-seed to Series B. How much traction are you looking for in a pre-seed company and in terms of revenue, which is very challenging, but maybe that happens, or are you looking for other things instead?
Yeah, we're looking for generally some kind of technical proof of concept combined with some commercial signal. Sometimes that can come in the form of revenue. Oftentimes that can just come in the form of, if you design this drug, there is a massive market waiting to be served. Or sometimes it can come in the form of partnership with a large strategic that is bought into what you're doing and illustrates that you're solving an urgent commercial problem for them. So commercial traction for us can come in a number of different flavors. And we look at so many different kinds of companies. Everyone looks different. So I know there are venture firms that focus on SaaS or focus on whatever, and they have these very specific metrics. A seed stage company needs this, and they have these KPIs. That's so far from what we do. Every company is really different, but whatever stage we're investing in, we just want to understand that there's a massive market and some customer that is demonstrated that the value proposition of this company is very real.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the fact that you're looking at different types of companies in biotech itself, right? So for us, we've seen VCs that only focus on biopharma and then others that focus on climate tech. But you guys have done both because those are different types of strategies, right? Biopharma is like, okay, get to IND and then sell off the asset. And then you have the commodities side of bioindustrials. Have you seen other investors do that as well? And if so, can you list them off?
Yeah, we'd like to know them.
Yeah, great question. I know I have found that if we had a category where I think we were especially well suited to invest it, it is at the intersection here. There are deep tech funds that are a little bit scared of biology.
Yeah.
There are some, I think Lux, they do. Yeah. Lux.
Mm-hmm.
Lux will do that. Lightspeed. I think even generalist VCs that are starting to do more of that. Khosla is one. But yeah, this is a huge category for us where tech meets bio. And I know people have mixed feelings about that term, tech bio. I tend to like it. I think it says what it means. But using technology, whether it's computation, machine learning AI, or genetic engineering, or robotics to work with biology, whether that is on the human health side, where you're designing better drugs faster and cheaper, or whether it's on the climate side, where it could be any number of things, designing seeds, using biology to perform a certain function, biomanufacturing. Tom and Ben got a lot of exposure when they were at Cascade. They were early investors in Ginkgo and Beyond and Impossible, and then also therapeutics. And then Caleb on our team is really deeply knowledgeable in the therapeutic space. He was at Innovation Endeavors. That's another firm that does this very well, I think. And I have this weird kind of like biomedical background and then climate. We understand how complex biology is. We appreciate that. We also appreciate how powerful it is. This is one category that excites us immensely, and particularly with advances in AI, what that might enable in terms of unlocking insights from biological data. We have another company that's generating a lot of biological data. We'll talk about the company now. It's a company called Vivadyne. They're using robot. Have you heard of them?
Yes. Yeah, but tell the audience. I'm excited. This is such a cool company.
Yeah. So Vivadyne, it's not a new concept. People have been trying to do organoids and organ on a chip for a long time. And the challenge has been consistency and repeatability. And they've really nailed that using robotics and microfluidics and AI and machine learning. And they are building models of human tissue and using that for preclinical research, being able to recapitulate human biology better than mouse models and do some of those experiments earlier and differently. I know we're going to talk about Femtech a little bit. That's an area I care really deeply about. I view Vivadyne as a Femtech company because they're building placenta models and different tissue types that maybe the mouse model isn't as effective, or we have a very limited understanding of female biology generally. So they're definitely one of my favorite Femtech companies out there that we didn't originally think of them in those terms. So they're today selling services to big pharma, and they have partnerships with some of the biggest pharma companies in the world. Nice. But then they're also, as you can imagine, generating a ton of data through this. And so there's really interesting opportunity ahead for them as everybody talks about building a foundation model for biology. But whatever that ends up meaning, they're generating a lot of this really interesting data that will ultimately help us understand biology and its complexity in a more interesting way.
Yeah, I'm curious if you know about Vivadyne and how they are replicating human tissue. Are they also replicating like immune system with that? Are they like representing it very accurately in terms of the complexity of that's actually going on in our bodies?
They have different models for different tissue types. And I know a lot of their early effort has been around bone marrow model, for example. I guess the question that I always think about with this company is, okay, well, if you have these different tissue types, but there's also this systems thing going on and you're not really incorporating that, how important is that? But I think our models right now are so crude. Our understanding of biology is so crude. So this is a starting point. And what they've been able to do is unbelievable, just in terms of, again, growing these tissues in the lab. It's super science fiction, but
yeah. We've seen companies, for example, is it United Therapeutics, Karl?
Yeah, they're one of them.
Yeah, doing the xenotransplantation where they are raising pigs to have close to human-like organs. And that's for transplants, though, not just for testing drugs. But
so cool.
Because it's being grown in the animal, it takes into consideration all systems. And I think that's always the consideration, because we also have companies that are running AI on mouse models. So then you can simulate a mouse model and run a test through that versus the organ on a chip. So they're like anti-organ on a chip because they're saying that it's not fully one-to-one representing the whole system. But then it's like, do you need the whole system? Is it just a toxicity study versus an efficacy study?
Right. And these guys are just starting with some of this early tox work. And I think we're probably going to need everything.
Yeah.
But this costs $3 billion to develop an average drug. This is a way to essentially just move more efficiently. And maybe you're not operating with perfect data, but to be able to do that earlier in a drug development process, gather more information about tox is valuable to these companies. But yeah, I think it's a great question. And I always think about, to the extent that we get to AGI and these AI models can really reason, how much more data will we really need? If AI were to read like every biology textbook and every scientific paper that's ever been written in natural language, what would AI be able to derive about how our current paradigms of understanding about biology, where they're missing, what experiments we need to run? Right now, we're in this age where everybody's talking about data, data, data. I'm curious to know what the next 5 years will look like and how much more data do we need to build up our understanding of biology? Or maybe will we get to a place where AI can reason in a way where we actually don't need that much more data and we can trust AI to just comprehend the complexity, the infinite complexity of biology in a way that the human mind could never possibly do, and design experiments that the human mind could never possibly experiment based design in terms of the way that we're comprehending.
Right. That's wild. Because like my instinct is we still need a lot more data just because we don't really understand biology on so many levels. But if AGI exists, or then maybe you're right. Maybe it would just be very specific about the kind of data it would need to reach a certain amount of knowledge that we would be looking for.
Yeah. I think the greatest AI researchers in the world right now disagree on whether we're 2 years away, we're 10 years away, we're never going to reach AGI. So who knows? But these are the things I like to think about. And I'm so excited for the day. And I hope it's sooner rather than later, where I can have this AI agent that really understands what's going on with me, is streaming data in real time off of me. She's on the edge. My data is completely private. I completely trust her. She can detect what's going on and tell me what to do to rebalance my biology, whether it's eating in a different way, sleeping in a different way, taking a supplement. Everything we're doing right now is fairly crude. And I think there's just so much opportunity ahead when it comes to AI and biology. It's definitely the most exciting part of AI for me. We've always been trying to understand ourselves throughout time. That's what we do as humans. This is just an accelerant for what we've been doing since we invented fire.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of people working in the tech space, working on AI that don't even have biology degrees are coming into the biology world. I've been seeing a lot of founders that are making AI for drug discovery. That's everyone's tagline. I think there's over like 800 companies that are in the space globally. And a lot of them are coming from the data side. From your perspective, how important is it to have a biology background when you're starting a biology company in terms of being the CEO or CTO, or how important is that? Is that something that can be learned or something that that you need?
My personal opinion is it's definitely something that you need. The more you start to learn about biology, the more you understand how little we know about biology. I remember being like, oh my gosh, I thought everybody understood so much more than they do. We're all doing the best we can as a human species, and what we've been able to do is unbelievable. And the drugs we've been able to design, and it's unbelievable. However, at the same time, there's so little we know. I think the less you know, the less you understand about how little we know. And then I think that's a problem when you're trying to build a company in the space. But at the same time, I think bringing people together from both disciplines is great. And everything we do at Bison is highly multidisciplinary. We love seeing teams like that. And we think the best solutions and companies will require bringing that all together under one roof. I do think there's definitely a place for people that come from computer science to get into this realm, but I hope they're partnering with people that have PhDs in biology.
Yeah, so you touched on it. And one of the things we wanted to talk to you about was around Femtech, which we know is the understanding of female biology is sadly worse than male biology. we hope that that's changing. We had Laura Minkini talk about the funding mechanisms for research into women's biology, and you're passionate about it. You've written about it. Talk to us a little bit about that. What are some of the key information gaps? What kind of companies are you looking at in that space? What gets you excited?
Yeah, it's a very exciting area and a very challenging area, just like all the areas I'm interested in. As you know, I'm drawn to complex and unknown realms. So climate, female biology, and neuro and the brain. These are my three areas of interest at the moment. People are starting to become really aware. Wow, there are so many diseases that disproportionately affect women, differentially affect women, and that uniquely affect women that we're just woefully misunderstand. And everybody talks about women weren't included in clinical trials until the 90s. That is problematic. What I like to say, though, is there was a reason for that. And that was because in the 70s, we had the thalidomide scandal where all of these women were given this drug and thousands of babies were born dead or with severe defects. The reason women weren't included in clinical trials is we wanted to protect women. And it's great now we're saying, well, shit, we need to understand more about female biology. So many women today are having this come to Jesus moment where they're like, oh my God, I'm 30 and I don't know anything about my cycle or anything about my biology. This is not fair. And that's true. I like to remind myself that we did that because 100 years ago, we wanted to join the workforce. So we wanted to de-emphasize how different we were. We wanted to de-emphasize our menstrual cycles. And I found this Harvard scientist woman who testified that basically that her period wasn't a big deal. And now today women are so I want to work with my cycle and understand my cycle. And it's not fair that I've been suppressing this. So I just think it's about evolution, and we're now in a time and a place where women have gotten more rights and we're working, and we now want to express ourselves as women. We want to understand ourselves as women. We want the world to appreciate the ways in which we're different. In terms of investing in the space, I get really frustrated because I look at a lot of really cool companies. I always run into the same challenge, which is market size. Even though women make up 50% of the population, so often these companies, either the willingness to pay for whatever the product or service that they're building is very low, or maybe they're going after a small number of women with a higher value proposition, but the market sizes tend to not meet that venture threshold. And when you end up doing the math, you're like, this is a $1 to $3 billion market opportunity. And that sucks. But hopefully there'll be capital flowing to these companies, whether they're building a diagnostic for endometriosis, or there are so many really cool femtech companies out there that I'm just, when I look at them, it's very hard to see them as venture scalable businesses. I do think that one thing I'll say that sort of bothers me, but I think it's okay, is there'll be a lot of femtech companies that don't look like femtech companies on the surface, but are great for women. And that's any company that's working on precision, personalization, that's embracing diversity of biology. That is really going to be great for women's health. I mentioned Vivadyne before, not a femtech company on the surface, but what they're doing, I think, is really going to move the needle for women's health. But I do think there's immense opportunity for companies that can generate data on women while also providing some kind of value beyond the data generation. Use that data to unlock insights about female biology. It's tricky. It's sort of the 23andMe model, but you need to have that primary value proposition first. It can't just be about data. There have been a lot of companies, not just in femtech, but broadly, that try to make data as the primary value prop. It should be a benefit on top of whatever the product or service is that you're providing to that consumer. So I think there'll be some opportunities for companies that can do that. The healthcare system is so broken. I'm not even going to pretend to understand how it works because I don't. But we see a lot of companies that are innovating outside of it, which is unfortunate on the one hand, because people are going to have to pay out of pocket for some of these products and services. But I think is a necessary part about really making change. So there have been a number of different companies that are taking blood work and giving a bunch of biomarkers and maybe trying to give people more agency around their own health. And all of that is cash pay out of pocket. And it's not fair. And I'd like to think that we can drive innovation within our healthcare system, but it just is extremely difficult. So those are just some of my frustrated thoughts.
Oh my God.
I really believe in, and I want to see the female Elon Musk just reimagine healthcare for women and build something really, really bold outside of the healthcare system. And I hope to see that at some point. I think I make a lot of analogies between femtech and climate. Both of these industries require you to embrace, again, I keep using this word complexity. If you think about climate as this other thing, no one's going to care about it. You have to think about ourselves as a part of this larger ecosystem that is interconnected. I think with women's health, we have to understand that women's health, mother's health, our children's health, public health issue. I think we need government help to push that along. And then in climate, the most successful climate company of all time was Tesla. It doesn't really look like a climate company. Elon just decided to build a better car and a better driving experience. So going back to what I was saying before, I think within Femtech, just companies that are building better healthcare experiences and appreciating the diversity of biology, those are the kinds of companies that I think are going to really, really move the needle and present outsized returns for investors.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. A lot of what you said is what I've been thinking as well. So I'm glad you articulated it. I mean, I'm definitely not going to repeat what you said, but I do appreciate the analogy and the relationship between climate and femtech. It reminds me of another VC we had on the pod. Do you know Kristen Ellis of Lower Carbon Capital?
I don't know her, but I know Lower Carbon well. Yeah.
Yeah. And when she was on the pod, she said that the Venn diagram between biology and climate is a circle because it is the same thing. It's all interconnected. The earth is biology. When you think about it that way, then it is this whole system. And you said mother and child, but Mother Earth, we are on it. Yeah. I love it. I see a lot of visuals. I mean, we are a podcast, so this is audio, but very poetic. I thank you so much.
I like to say a lot, we're one thing waking up to what we are. And
oh, wow. Did you make that up?
I did. I think so.
You're a writer.
Yeah, I definitely bridges it to the spiritual, which I try not to do at work. But yeah, the more that we are waking up to what we are, the more that this systems thinking will be embraced and we'll understand that we're the same and life on Earth is all one thing. And I know that's a radical paradigm that freaks people out and sounds kind of woo-woo, but
no, not to me.
That's the natural evolution of things and where we're going. But in the near term, you can't ask agents, whether human or corporates, to go against their best interest. That goes back to how we think about climate is this has to be in the interest of the individual. You can't ask someone to eat climate-friendly foods and sacrifice their health by eating processed climate-friendly foods. That's never going to work. That is by nature. So how do we design things that are actually just better and better for all of us and more sustainable?
Yeah. Before we wrap it up, I have one quick question. One quick question. Have you ever had an inclination to go back into the lab? Do you ever want to get your hands dirty or even start a company? Because you see so many things. You are such a big thinker. Did you ever get an itch? Maybe.
100%. I mean, the idea of going to get a PhD in something specific that I just really want to study definitely appeals. Every day I'm just I wish I had a full day to think about this or understand this. I don't have enough time to learn about all the things that I would like to learn. But to answer your question, yes, for sure.
We have AI too to satisfy something. So asking those questions, because that is a lot of the science. Science is asking the right questions. So just do. If you guys aren't seeing me, I'm doing the doot is just me typing on a computer, prompting a question to AI.
That's what Erum's AI computer sounds like when she types into it. It goes doot.
That's great. Yeah, if I had millions and millions and millions of dollars, I would definitely just want to be running my own research, all kinds of different designing experiments and learning.
Yeah, well, you could raise some capital. I know a fund that's into deep tech that might be interested in your idea. But this has been so much fun. I had such a great time.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Ari. Really appreciate it and love that we didn't talk about it, but love that we do have a lot of friends in common.
Absolutely. Yeah, we didn't talk about it again, but Ferment team is so great down here. And we have monthly calls with those guys to learn about what they're building. Jason Kakianis.
Yeah. Yeah, I just texted him yesterday because I haven't talked to him since, hey, I saw him for like a second at Symbio Beta, and we talked to each other a bunch to catch up at Ferment. And I was hoping when I'm in Southern California that I could catch up with him in person because we never get that one-on-one time.
Yeah. Definitely come down to LA.
Yeah, I mean, I come regularly because my parents are still in Ventura. My sister's in Newport. So next time I'm out, we'll go grab coffee.
Let me know, please. That would be great. Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. It was really nice to meet you and fun conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Enjoy your afternoon.
We'll have to have you back on as you make more investments and you learn more. And especially when AGI comes online, we'll have you on to chat about it if we can. I don't know what happens after that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Erum, what did you think of that episode?
It was incredible. Ari, like we said at the top of the episode, she is, for me, a sister from another mister. I mean, if I could say that, I think I can. It was just great to hear her perspective as an investor and the fact that she has seen this clean tech 1.0, was able to see some of the challenges that startups are facing. There were technologies that didn't exist at the time that are now commonplace. And she's able to take that experience, take that viewpoint, and bring it to companies that they invest in. Keep an eye out for those founders that are looking to do things in an innovative way. What did you think of that episode, Karl?
It's always interesting to hear investors that have their fingers in a couple of different pies. I think it's very hard for VCs to be very focused when there's so many opportunities out there to invest in. And I think one of the big lessons from that conversation with Ari, and we ended up having a bunch of email back and forth before the episode, after the episode. One of the big lessons is that startups are not baby versions of big companies. I think it's worth reminding people that startups are just companies that are in search of a business model. You're trying to figure out, you might have a technology, but what you're really trying to do is get repeat customers and be able to scale as quickly as possible if that's your goal. And the mistake that people have is that startups are just mini versions of big companies. They are not. And there is a lot of failure. And I think that it's important for founders to really understand what happened before you. I think there is a bit of myopia among founders who are not willing to really understand the history of their industry, because you can learn a lot from the failures and the successes. And that's really what should motivate you to move forward. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for new business models. I love that they're investing in Femtech. I think that that's something super important. We've had a couple of people talk about it on the podcast, notably Stephanie Culler of Persephone and Laura Minkini of Athena DAO. We just know that that's an area that's underinvested in, and we need a lot more money to go into that space.
Yeah, absolutely. Just love that she had that focus. Clean tech, neurotech is really interested, Femtech. And she said that they're all important. They're all working together. And it was great that she highlighted some of those companies. I want to emphasize a point that you just made about understanding the history of your industry. That's something that I don't think I did as a startup founder as much as I should have back in the day, but something that I know is absolutely necessary, especially since we're talking about companies are leveraging biotech to transform every industry and being able to be like, okay, I'm creating this biofuel. What does the aviation history look like? I think that's a very important point and something that maybe we should explore some more, talking more about the history of biotechnology. We do that. We have done that, but maybe a dedicated episode just to talk about the history of biotech and maybe some industries that are now using biotech more regularly, but what was that timeline like?
One thing I should mention, as we're going live with this podcast, Capgemini, which is a big global consulting firm, just put out their engineering biology report, which follows in the footsteps of what McKinsey and BCG had put out about the impact of biotech on different industries. And one thing I like that they did in this report that none of the others did was show specific examples of how biotechnology was already impacting other industries. And that's right up at the beginning of the report. It gives you an executive overview, and then you go into probably 5 or 6 slides that show, here's some companies that are working in aviation. Here's some companies that are working in materials. Here's some companies that are working in food. So you can already see, if you read the report, what the impact is that people are having. So we'll make sure we link to that in the show notes, and I'm writing about it for LinkedIn so you can find our opinions on the report and why it matters.
You mentioned the Capgemini report. You mentioned the McKinsey report, the BCG report, how they've been looking at biostrategy, but you beat them to it by 8 years. And when you and John Cumbers wrote the book, What's Your Biostrategy? So I'm glad they're finally picking up the pace and starting to speak the same language, starting to understand why you, John Cumbers, and everyone that you interviewed for the book are so excited about biotechnology, why we have this podcast. And now let's work together to grow everything using biotechnology. It's such a great time.
I think that is the perfect way to end the pod.
Yay. All right.
All
Stay
right.
tuned for our next episode, which will be live. So we'll see you guys on the flip side.